This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey, Brian Tripp with you here. Tripp, might be the offseason. We have, though, a loaded podcast for you. We'll put a bow on 2025 recruiting, as on Wednesday was the final second last recruiting day. May have missed that. Well, not a big day, but we still have some news and notes here to touch on there as well. Ohio State's made a few coaching moves we'll dive into. We have Antonio Morales of The Athletic coming on here in a little bit, Tripp. I'm excited for him because USC's made a flurry of moves, right? Basically, for lack of a better term, front office moves that we're going to talk to Antonio about, not just with USC specifically, but really in general, because now you're seeing more college football teams make these sort of moves. What are the expectations? What now changes for coaches? How does recruiting change in general? We'll get Antonio's thoughts on that as well. So a loaded pod. Oh, by the way, seeing your hat, we have a big game coming up here in a few days as well. What's going on, man?
Not much. Getting excited for Super Bowl Sunday. And, the diligent podcast host or co-host in this case that I am going to tie it, instead of just really ramble on and on and on about the Philadelphia Eagles and my love and loyalty for the Eagles, as I've worn, I think, my Eagles hat basically since we started this podcast. I will tell you that there are 21 Big Ten players participating in Super Bowl 59 in New Orleans, 12 for the Kansas City Chiefs and 9 for the Philadelphia Eagles. And the two leading Big Ten schools, Michigan and Penn State, each have 3 players participating in this year's Super Bowl. Obviously, the most notable of those, Saquon Barkley, who I think could be the MVP.
Oh, damn. I was just missed that. The other running back in this game, Saquon Barkley.
Also a Big Ten running back, Isaiah Pacheco.
That's right. Rutgers fame. Let's go. We'll definitely dive into that game more. We'll hear Tripp's watching habits in a little bit because I'm fascinated. I know I have a few Eagles fans. I'm sure a lot of folks listening either are Eagles fans or no Eagles fans. You people, Tripp, are a different breed. Different breed, without a doubt. And I say that both lovingly and also as a little dig.
What do you mean by you people?
Eagles fans.
How so?
Period.
Yeah. This could be a conversation unto itself, but are you like riding the national narrative saying that, oh, Philadelphia fans are crazy, they're unfair, they're rude, or is it just like, I agree that Philly fans are a different breed. I agree Philly fans are a different breed, but I don't think it's for the narrative that the nation's media, the popular narrative that they have. I think Philly fans are passionate. I think they're smart. I think they support their teams. I think they're loyal. I think they live and die with their teams more than any other city. But I've been to sporting events across the country and have been fortunate to be in the stands, on the field, working, not working. And I'll be honest with you. And maybe it's just because when I go to a Phillies game, I'm wearing a Phillies jersey, or an Eagles game, I'm wearing Eagles gear, Flyers, Sixers. But I honestly have not experienced anything in Philadelphia that I haven't experienced at a college game, pro game, wherever it may be, anywhere else. Like, I've walked from the press box in Iowa City at Kinnick Stadium in my Penn State stuff, going down to work on the sideline for a 3:30 kickoff. And the stuff I heard walking from the press box to the sideline is as bad as you could hear anywhere. The stuff I heard in Morgantown was as bad as the stuff you hear in Columbus for a night game, the stuff you unfortunately hear and see even at the teams that you support, even in Happy Valley. Like, there's a few bad eggs everywhere. And I don't think Philadelphia is any different. I think they've got this stigma and this narrative that's been based around Philadelphia fans. So anytime there's something small that occurs, or a fan who purposely is wearing opposing teams' gear with a body cam or filming themselves walking through the parking lot with the intention of going viral, like, I think it happens everywhere. I've experienced it other places. I think it's the nature of the beast, especially anytime alcohol is involved. And I think Philly fans, I think they are a special breed. I think you people, that's me. I think we are, because I think we're smart, loyal, dedicated, passionate. not afraid to share our opinions, good or bad, on your teams, and you live and die with it. And I think the connection that Philadelphia has to its teams is unlike anywhere else. And I think, for you to start this podcast today, trying to just once again, as a New Yorker, start the national narrative of here's Philly. Oh, they're going to throw snowballs at Santa Claus is lazy. And I just expected better from you.
I want to get into this more later, and I want to more talk about your watching habits. But all I'll say to that is this. Every fan base has a bad egg or two, no doubt about it. Mm-hmm. The volume of bad eggs, no doubt about it, is higher in the Eagles fan base than any other fan base in this country. That's all I'll say. It's not an accident that you talk about Eagles fans and there's this thought and perception around them, because it happens all the time. All the time. And the volume that it happens, the amount of fans that do take it to the level that you shouldn't.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Can I ask you a question? When's the last Eagles game you've been to?
Never been. I would never go. Never.
Then how can you have that opinion and narrative?
Social media.
From what?
I hear stories. That's all I got.
You can find anything you want on social media. You can find anything you want.
In other fan bases.
You want to find life on another planet? Go on social media.
Wow. We'll see about that. But look, I think the video's don't lie. That's all. That is all. All right, we will, though, break down more of the Super Bowl a little bit later on. But, Trip, how about this? A little breaking news here on Thursday morning. Ryan Day is having quite the month here. Wins a national title. He's kind of doing the victory tour and now gets himself paid. 7-year extension, getting now paid on average $12.5 million per year, second in the country to only Kirby Smart. Your reaction to this is?
Not surprised, much deserving. Won the national championship at Ohio State. They have all of the resources, and they showed after the Michigan loss that their commitment, and I know it's a lot easier to say now and prove after winning a national championship, but really the commitment at that time was unwavering to Ryan Day. He's been as successful as any coach in all of college football. Certainly, we've discussed ad nauseum this Michigan problem that they've had, but here you have a guy who's basically won every single game he's coached in, with the exception of the games against Michigan or a couple of playoff losses here, and he's the real deal. When you talk about the top coaches in college football, Ryan Day is among the top 5 coaches in college football right now, and he deserves to be one of the highest paid coaches in the sport. I'm not surprised at all. It adds 3 years onto his current deal and keeps him as Ohio State's head coach through 2031. He already was one of the 5 highest paid coaches in college football when the USA Today released the coaching salaries list in October, which is where we're basing this off of. He was 5th at $10 million per year. Kirby Smart, again, just ahead of him at just north of $13 million per season, but a 7-year, $12.5 million contract extension for national championship winning head coach Ryan Day, who also, since this national championship, if you follow him, and I know he's done the media tour, like I didn't expect to see him on Fallon, really didn't expect to see him on Kelly Clarkson. He's been all over the place. He's kind of taken on a different persona on social media too. There was the Michigan fan that went up to him when he was walking into a restaurant, and he just had a laugh about it. He's got that swagger, that confidence, kind of comes across as an everyday guy who's just a really successful college football coach. Took a picture flying over the horseshoe and posted 210 days until next season already. It seems like a weight's been lifted off. I think Ryan Day felt the pressure too. Even though they'd been incredibly successful, it feels like a weight's been lifted off of his shoulders as well since winning the national championship. But now he'll be weighed down a bit more by his wallet.
A problem I think we all wish we could have. That damn wallet's so heavy.
A wallet here, Ryan Day.
Hundreds falling out ever. Oh, shoot. Just take them. I'm glad you brought that up because I had the same.
Wait, hold on. Do you still carry around, do you carry around a wallet, money clip, or do you just have your phone with a little thing on the back?
Wallet. I'm still a wallet guy. No, I never really bring cash. Yeah. I have a 3-fold. What do you got? A 2-fold or a 3-fold?
Mine's a 3-fold. I actually have cash because it's still in my wallet from Christmas. Right here.
Whoa!
The only reason. It's the only reason. I probably should stop at the bank and deposit that. Yeah, I'm still a big wallet guy. I don't know. Maybe it's just the generation. My dad always had a big wallet, but I do. I never have cash. I really could condense. All I need is my driver's license, and a card. I'm not sure why I carry a wallet around, but I still am a wallet guy too.
I like the security of like, I don't know, like having my
feel like it's
phone and
probably
like
less
cards
ultimately
separate.
though, if you think about it, it's probably less secure to have all those different cards and resources in your.
And I will say, I don't carry it exactly like you should carry it.
How so?
I'm a big back pocket guy. I know you shouldn't do it. I can't help it. It's so comfortable.
Let me tell you this. Living in State College, it doesn't matter where you carry your wallet. New York City might be a little different. How often you take the subway? Every day, right?
Every day. Late at night, overnights. Knock on wood, so far, no one's at. Well, I mean, the good news is, I don't know, good news. You take the wallet, there's nothing in it. So good luck. You know, you
No,
want to try to
you
use that.
don't have any cash in it. You just have your cards. You call, you cancel your cards, get those
yeah.
changed. Get a new
What if you want
driver's
to take the
license.
debit card? Have fun. You may
Bang,
go to
bang,
convenience
you're good to
store and
go.
get a coffee, and that's it. Yeah, for real. So yeah, we definitely do. At least I do not have the problem Ryan Day has of carrying around a big ass wallet for sure. But I'm glad you brought up the point of like he feels like different since the national title. I don't make this comparison. It does feel like we could be looking at Ryan Day kind of entering like kind of how LeBron did. Remember like when LeBron won his first title with the Heat? Like he's gotten there before, the pressure was on. He choked the year before against the Mavericks team that the Heat should have won. They didn't. But once he finally got that first title, it's like, okay, the weight's off. And now you can almost just play free and loose. You saw him go to 8 straight finals where they went 3. Right. In that span, like it does feel like once you get that first one, kind of a lot of the pressure is alleviated. Now, again, when you come to Michigan, it's a different story. But I think we could see like a different Ryan Day going forward, a guy that is having a little bit more fun, is enjoying it more. Maybe that kind of trickles down to a more efficient team, more just more consistent, maybe Ohio State team going forward. It feels like now that the first one's off, you see like the pressure visibly lift off his shoulders. I think we could see a different Ryan Day in a positive way going forward, Trip.
Do you think the national championship correlates then to the upcoming Michigan games, like future Michigan games, knowing that the game is not a live or die situation, and now they have the swagger and winning a championship? Does that relieve pressure from the Michigan game? So going into it, even though there is this storyline narrative that's going to continue, and we expect Michigan, if you look at what they've been able to do in Sherrone Moore through the portal, through the recruiting process this year, do you think it helps Ohio State moving forward to get over that Michigan problem? Or does the Michigan problem in the grand scheme not even matter anymore?
No, I think it matters for sure. I think it definitely matters. But I think you hit on a word that I think is a reason why I'm going to say yes, that the national title does help maybe try to beat Michigan. Swagger. So I think you look at the last few years, right? After that first loss to Michigan, I think maybe some confidence is gone. Okay, well, we lost. Now that dominant run is over. Michigan's still a good team. Then they go into the shoe and beat you in 2022. And now it's like, okay, well, maybe this rivalry has turned. And I think the last 2 years in 2023 and 2024, Ohio State's gone with very little confidence compared to where they were 5 years ago. It almost felt like just a formality if they're going to go wherever they're playing, beat Michigan, and most likely beat them handily. I think now winning the national title does take some pressure off to where you're, to your point. I think they go into Ann Arbor next year with way more swagger than maybe they otherwise would have, even if they went to the national title game and lost. I think winning the championship now gives Ryan Day confidence of, oh, I can do this. I can do anything. They still got to win the game. But I think at least going into that game in the last Saturday of November will help from a swagger and confidence perspective that otherwise I don't think would be there if they did not make this national title run.
Is it easier that they have to play that game in Ann Arbor next season as opposed to Ohio State? I know we've heard this discussion before, right? It's kind of been discussed on national platforms, but is it easier that that game is in Ann Arbor instead of Columbus?
That's interesting. I would probably just say yes, just because I think it's harder. I think it's harder to overcome when you're at home and fans are going, oh no, here we go again. Versus if a big play early happens for Michigan, hearing a raucous Michigan crowd. I think it's easier to just kind of refocus if you're on the road and the crowd's going crazy versus if you're at home, you kind of have that almost deafening silence of, uh-oh, here we go again. What do you think?
I disagree with that. I think it's always easier to play at home, just to have the crowd behind you, third downs. I think the impact in college football, I think it's almost the touchdown impact in big games in college football, the home crowd. So While, yes, I understand why people would say that, and why I bring that up is I think there is some validity to it. But in this instance, I'd still want to be at home in front of your own fans because the impact that they can make on the game. I will say, though, they won't, and I would think in this situation, it's not going to be an impact of, and this is like way look ahead, trying to put pieces together. I think you're onto something with the, "Oh no, here we go again," like the booing. It does add some pressure, but I think the positives of it outweigh the negatives still of being at home and not on a hostile environment on the road.
Interesting. So we know Ryan Daly's going to going to next season. Right now, he's going to be paid well, second highest paid coach, as we just said, this breaking news extension. He's also going to have, I guess you can say, a new man next to him in Brian Hartline, who also gets a promotion. Now he has been made the offensive coordinator and will have play calling duties for Ohio State here in 2024. We talked about a lot on Monday trip, right? There's a lot of Ohio State options. We talked about whether it was Kevin Wilson, Bill O'Brien for the short stint that he was in Columbus, and then Chip Kelly. The theme for Ohio State when it comes to OCs has been former head coaches that have called plays before that have at least a track record of success. This is deviating from the norm, if you will, in promoting a guy in Brian Hartline who's never called plays before, who's never had that responsibility, who's never done it before, the track record of success. He's an elite recruiter, Trip. What do you think of this move now, ultimately making Hartline the new Buckeyes OC and play caller? How do you feel about it?
Not just an elite recruiter, but an elite coach at the wide receiver position. And he has had that co-offensive coordinator position. He's elevated himself through the ranks at his alma mater, Ohio State, and has played at the highest level. I think at 38 years old, we had the discussion, is he as qualified maybe as some of those other people? No. But is he absolutely deserving of this role? Yes. I think it was time. If they passed over Brian Hartline again, number one, this creates longevity for Brian Hartline on Ryan Day's staff in Columbus. And you don't have to, if he's the offensive coordinator, you don't have to worry about him leaving for any other role than a big time premier. And this is what, if he wants to be, right? If he wants to be a premier head coaching job at a premier school in college football, that's the type of reputation that he's built as a recruiter, as a coach, developing wide receivers at Ohio State. So he's absolutely deserving, even though we debated on Monday night's pod, that is this the right move because of his lack of experience in that role? Well, he's been the co-offensive coordinator, but what Ohio State has done, and which I think is really, really smart, is with all the turnover on their staff, they went out and hired Tyler Bowen from Virginia Tech, who was the offensive coordinator at Virginia Tech, to be their new offensive line coach to replace Fry. And then Billy Fessler's the quarterback coach now. And both of those hires have offensive coordinator play calling experience. Bowen, when he was at Virginia Tech, Fessler, who was previously Akron's offensive coordinator and had spent time around Ohio State. And those two names for Big Ten fans, probably familiar because Bowen was on James Franklin's staff at Penn State, worked with Joe Moorhead, and then obviously Fessler working with Joe Moorhead at Akron. So these are two guys who have play calling experience, have offensive coordinator experience. And then if you count Hartline's experience, now you have three guys on Ohio State's offensive staff that truly already have offensive coordinator credentials. So I think it's smart hires to go along with the promotion. And I think the promotion of Hartline goes hand in hand with the hires that they make at those other positions.
Well said. I think you're right. I think Ryan Day did a very smart job of insulating, if you will, Brian Hartline with some experience, some guys who have done it before, where I'm sure it's going to be some sort of collaboration, right, between those three guys, and just kind of make that transition easier. Where, again, we're not just talking about a new play caller in Hartline, but also a new offense where a lot of turnover on the offensive line. Really, Jeremiah Smith's one of the few constants they have.
Young guys who are really highly regarded and believed to be rising stars in the profession as well, right? Bowen was Penn State's tight end coach, went to the National Football League. He was with the Jaguars. He was with Urban Meyer there. I think he stuck around with Doug Peterson as well for a year. He was someone that was retained from staff to staff before reuniting with Brent Pry when he went to Virginia Tech to become their offensive coordinator. And he's a guy who's an elite recruiter. He continues to elevate himself in the profession. And, it's interesting, right? This is the power of Ohio State for a coach to take an ACC offensive coordinator role and then take a step back as the offensive line coach at Ohio State. no longer is that seen as a demotion. It's seen, I think, as a way to elevate yourself, elevate your profile in the coaching world to go on a place like that. And the same for Fessler, who also spent time around Chip Kelly at UCLA. So these are guys who have been around, not only around the sport, but around some people with those rich Ohio State connections in Urban Meyer, in Ryan Day, in a Chip Kelly now. And I think that also the comfortability that Ryan Day will have with them and Brian Hartline really allows that staff to meld ideas and come together collaboratively. That should really benefit Ohio State.
And speaking of benefit too, right, the big knock on Justin Frye when he was there in Columbus was the fact that he didn't recruit well. Maybe lost out on some guys. Now we saw this year, especially, a great developer and a great coach and teacher. But now you look at Tyler Bowen, a guy, especially when he was at Penn State, was connected to recruiting Olu Fashanu amongst other guys. Like, if he can now come in and continue a high level teaching, but also now get on the recruiting show, maybe improve Ohio State's offensive line recruits compared to what Frye had. Again, you feel good about the direction of where Ohio State is going. The other thing too about this hire trip is, I think when you look at Brian Hartline coming,
I want to cut you off there for 1 second.
Sure.
Frye did an unbelievable job with that line and all the injuries they had. Like, you can tell why.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
No, I'm not trying to knock him. Just no, you're right. He was a great developer. And again, I thought this year with the injuries they had, he did an outstanding
job. They haven't
job.
recruited talent. They have tons of talent. They're as talented typically. Besides, I think this year they had some depth deficiencies, but that's a line that's churning out NFL players year after year. I don't know. It came across as a little bit negative towards Justin Frye. Maybe that's not what you were intending. So,
I mean, I think the standard is so high that I think Ohio State fans expect to win every recruiting battle. And I think with Frye, there was frustration there that they weren't winning every single offensive line recruiting battle, maybe the way they were with quarterback, with receiver, with DB, with D end. That's like,
okay,
not in general, but in comparison to Ohio State and some of the other positions they have, right? That was a question mark. You talked about it going into the year, right? Even when they were healthy, it was a question mark. Now I'm with you. Did an excellent job once injuries happened of developing and coaching and sliding guys in and out, playing out of position. Great job. But if Tyler Bowen can come in, and again, that's a high bar, number one, to clear of that coaching ability. But if you can also recruit maybe a tick higher, again, you got to feel good about the Buckeyes' future on the offensive line, obviously, as well as everywhere else. I'm also interested to see, Trip, with Hartline coming in, what does Ohio State offense looks like? Because I would argue that their key to success, right? They are more of as a program, a pass-first team. That's where a lot of their success is. That's where their strengths are. And you look at last year under Chip Kelly, who has been more of a power run first guy, run to set up the pass. When you have the starters in, right, taking kind of garbage time out of it. When you had the starters in, Ohio State last year had 443 run plays to 423 pass plays. That's only a 20-play difference, pass to run, but they outran or had more runs than pass plays, which did deviate from the norm for Ohio State in the past few years, which they're more pass first, then run the ball. I expect with Brian Hartline obviously working with receivers, I think Ohio State will kind of get back to a little bit more of a pass-first identity. Now, again, a lot of moving parts. We have Jeremiah Smith, so that just makes sense right there. But I think that's what you can expect from Ohio State's offense, what to look like in a guy that we don't know obviously too much about in terms of what his style is preferred and how he wants to call an offense. I think we could see the ball thrown a little bit more than we did at least last year.
I think pass first. I don't know if I agree with that, because even if you go back over the last 10 years, obviously starting the last 3 with Travion Henderson, but then J.K. Dobbins and Ezekiel Elliott, they've had really great running backs. And I think in the Big Ten, you have to be able to be a run-first offense because of the climate and the weather that you play in late in the season. And maybe run first is a bad term, and maybe pass first is a bad term. But a 50-50 split on the offensive side. And look, they've also done it with the running quarterbacks over the year. Yep. Braxton Miller was a mobile guy. J.T. Barrett was a mobile guy at the quarterback position. I think Stroud had mobility, but they didn't run him a ton. They had Justin Fields at that position, right? So I'm not sure I entirely agree with the pass the pass first. I think they've churned out elite wide receivers and have had the ability to have an elite passing game because the big plays and explosive plays are there. But I think it's always been complemented by a really, really good running back. And in the Big Ten, with the size and physicality that they're going to have along the offensive line, I don't know that I'd want to completely deviate away from what worked for you to get you to the national championship this year, and really what's worked for you going back over the last 10, 15, 20 seasons, or you can go all the way back at Ohio State. I mean, they have a guy who's the only guy to win the Heisman Trophy twice at the running back position in Archie Griffin. So I'm not sure I entirely agree. I know where you're going with it, and I don't entirely disagree with where you're going with it. I get your point. But I think the terminology pass first is a dangerous one there. And I think it's dangerous to label them as that over the last couple of seasons as well.
Balance has been there, no doubt about it, like you said, especially from the quarterback position as well, and they run the ball. Interesting to see, though. Very interesting to see as now Brian Hartline kind of takes over the reins. We'll see how much Ryan Day kind of lets him mold the offense, but definitely some new changes there in Columbus for sure. Still waiting on a defensive coordinator hire for the Buckeyes as well. But otherwise, that staff really starting to round out after a large exodus in Columbus. This team will not be confused, Chip, with a pass-first team, and that is Michigan. And so Wednesday was what used to be the OG national sign day, right before basically most of the big-time players signed in the early signing window in December. But Wednesday was the second and final signing day. Again, most stars were already signed, so yesterday wasn't a big day. And again, if you didn't hear about it, that's probably why. But to credit Michigan here, they did get the highest-rated unsigned recruit in the country on Wednesday, and that was 5-star offensive tackle Ty Haywood. He was, again, the top remaining player on the board, at least in terms of ESPN's player ranking. He was the third offensive tackle prospect. He had interest from Florida State and Texas Tech, and Michigan was able to win. And now you look, Trip, at what Michigan has been building under Sherrone Moore here, where despite their record-wise not being great, strong finish of the year and beating Ohio State and Michigan, and that's or Ohio State and Alabama, and that's correlated to recruiting success. So we're now, at least according to ESPN, they have the 6th ranked recruiting class in the country, 3rd in the Big Ten behind Oregon and Ohio State. They have 8 signees from ESPN's top 100. I know we talked about recently, the future of Michigan. Hey, can Sherrone Moore win a title in the next decade? I think for at least Michigan fans, this is, the best sign you can ask for, where it was a down year, but at least off the field recruiting wise, Sherrone Moore is building this team quickly up to what they were just a few years ago.
And a lot of this recruiting, though, this work for this class really dates back to when they won the national championship. So they had momentum coming off the national championship. But to your point, I think it's impressive whenever there's a coaching change, even though it's one where Moore already has relationships with a lot of these players. And I think it was expected that if Harbaugh left for whatever reason, whether it was to go pro or something happens with this NCAA investigation, that Moore would kind of be the guy. And he's related to so many players well. So he still had to keep the class intact. And not only did he do that, to your point, getting Bryce Underwood, getting Ty Haywood here, they've been able to expand and build on that class. They've been successful in the portal. And Michigan's been able, even with that noise that's going on with the investigation, even with the record they had this season, obviously the exciting finish, they've been able to keep momentum off of their national championship. So I think he's done a great job. I think he's really, really relatable as a head coach to these younger players. And it's a team, it's Michigan, right? I don't know why. I guess because of the Stallions thing, because they had a down year, because Harbaugh leaves. Like when you thought college football powers 12 months ago, you thought Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan. There's no reason for us not to include them in that conversation. I think it's just the nature of a 24/7, 365 news cycle. We get so wrapped up in the immediacy of what's going on. But what they've built over the last 5 years to get back into the national prominence and get back into the playoff and as national championship contenders and ultimately national champions, that's the Michigan. That's still the brand of Michigan right now, even with everything changing. And I think it's important not to forget that. And this recruiting class helps remind you of that Michigan is here to compete and probably here to stay.
I was in that camp this time last year, right after they won the national title, of a downfall is coming. Like Michigan won the national title, great, but they're going to sink down for a while. in part of because Harbaugh was leaving and that staff left and they had a mass exodus to the NFL. And obviously, like you said, hanging over the head of possible sanctions, possible punishment, who the hell knows if and when that actually does come down. But also part of it was like when you look at the recruiting rankings the last few years, Michigan was never top 5, top 10, top 15, even top 20 in a lot of these, 2020, 2021, 2022. Like in that 3 or 4 year run they had their heyday, they weren't like cleaning up and recruiting. Jim Harbaugh did an excellent job of developing talent, finding underidentified players, building them into a system, finding guys that maybe weren't 5 stars, but 3 stars and fit perfectly into the culture, what they're trying to accomplish. And so, like, even though they had a ton of success for 3 years, they weren't exactly killing it on the recruiting trail. And that's why I'm like, okay, well, you didn't exactly recruit great. The staff did a great job of developing. And now with Jim Harbaugh gone, a lot of other guys gone, like, can Michigan recruit the high-level talent? I had question marks. I really did. And then obviously everything else on top of it. And so to see Sherrone Moore do this, and now when you look at like everything, the early signing period, the signing period we had on Wednesday, the transfer portal rankings, Michigan, with every possible acquisition they could have made in, going into 2025, they are 8th in the country in terms of like, let's just call it a class, 2025 class. That's like the fact you can get consistently blue chip, high talented players to come to your program, believe when you weren't even doing that in your heyday a few years ago. I think I'm with you. It underscores the fact that it does feel like maybe there was a question this time last year. Is this a blip on the radar? Will Michigan kind of go in, not in the tank, but kind of maybe not be a national title contender for a while? I think Sherrone Moore, at least off the field, now you got to win on the field, right? But at least off the field, is doing a great job of saying Michigan is, like you said, here to stay.
But I think there's kind of this misnomer right now that if you're not a top 5, top 10 team in recruiting, like Michigan, they're still in 2020 and 2021, they were ranked 13th in their recruiting class by 24/7. They were in 2022 ranked 12th in the recruiting class by 24/7. Those are still excellent classes, and you're accumulating enough depth of talent there. I think the recruiting thing, if you're somewhere between 1 and 20, you're gonna be competitive. Like I think there's this huge and maybe it's because of the Georgia, Alabama dominance, Ohio State. Like, yeah, they always have top 5, top 6, top 7 classes. But Michigan, in a lot of ways, pretty comparable to Penn State in the talent that they've been able to accumulate. But then it's, can you get enough difference makers to put you over the top? And in that 2021 class, their top 2 recruits were Donovan Edwards and J.J. McCarthy. Junior Colson was their 4th best recruit that year, who helped them win a national championship, right? Same thing in the 2022 class. Will Johnson was their top-ranked recruit. And guess what? They hit on their top-ranked recruit. So they've had guys, Colston Loveland, in that class as well. I think they're accumulating enough 4 stars, 3, 4. Not everyone has to be a 5-star and you have to hit. Certainly those guys are difference makers and they can make an elite difference. But I think knocking Michigan or saying, I don't expect them to be there because they didn't have a class that was in the top 10, top 5, it does speak to your point that Sherrone Moore was able to accumulate this type of class in a top 10 class at Michigan when it is something they haven't done. But I think to consider them as bad, I know you're not saying that, but like, I think we get so wrapped up in stars and rankings. And really, if you're in the neighborhood of 10, top 15, it's kind of splitting hairs and different agencies. What are the rankings going to be? You're talking about this not being signing the first Wednesday of February isn't signing day. The big signing day anymore because everyone signs early on the early signing period, which has been moved up to the first week of December. I can remember covering National Signing Day for years for Big Ten Network and being their on-campus reporter at Penn State and being a part of a 4, 5, 6 hour show. And yeah, when Micah Parsons announced at Penn State and I'm in the Lash building and everyone's waiting for that video to release, like they were already told Micah Parsons was committing to Penn State. They were told. But because of, he's Micah, there was still this, well, in the video, is he going to put on a different hat? Like what's he going to do? And the excitement when you get a player like that is significant, right? It is a real deal. So I'm not trying to discount the 5-star prospects being a top 5 class. The more 5 stars you have, obviously we've seen through the years, it does correlate directly to championship football. But I think the day and age, I think it's changed where as long as you're building a foundation in recruiting, there's different ways to get you to the finish line. And I think that's kind of where we're at big picture. Maybe not really as part of this Michigan discussion as much, but if you are a top 15, top 20 class, I still believe you need to lay a foundation in recruiting and get good players and get good talent, because the most critical thing in a 17 game season is having some depth more than ever, but always, even in a shorter season, the teams that were the deepest won the national championship. And you do that by recruiting well, but recruiting a conglomerate of outstanding players from top to bottom, not necessarily just being a number 1, number 5 class. And then I think it's changed now. Portal, NIL, so much of this has changed. Whatever the 20.5 million is going to be, there's going to be more parity. I think how we view recruiting classes is going to shift over the next 10, 15 years. I mean, I think it already has, but over the next 5, 10, 15 years is really going to change as well.
So we're going to give a quick shout out to Maryland also, because they had another nice little splash on Wednesday. Got 4-star edge rushers here, Mathis, out of Pennsylvania, 6'6", 225, so long, rangy. Still a project more than a finished product, so there's a lot of work there, but nice job by Mike Loxley to get him, again, one of the higher-ranked players on a day that, for the most part, again, all the Big Ten recruits have already signed in December. But Maryland beat out Florida State and Penn State to get Mathis, so nice job by them there. But one thing before we get to Antonio, Tripp, I want to run by you, because I think it's a fair point, like, when you look at recruiting rankings, maybe I'm guilty of it too. Like, you look too much. Are you in the top 5? Are you in the top 7? Like, from there, is there a big drop off? If you want to say top 20, I'll even expand it to top 25. You got to feel good then if you're the Big Ten, because you look at right now, high school recruiting and transfer portal rankings as well here for going to 2025. The full rankings in the Big Ten, Oregon comes in at 2nd, Ohio State 5, Michigan 8, USC 17, Nebraska 19, Penn State 20, and then we'll expand it 2 more here, Wisconsin 25 and Washington 26. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the top 26 class rankings here for 2025 fall in the Big Ten. And that's a good job by some of these schools, like you said, where if you're maybe just in that top 20, 25, 30 range for recruiting, you feel that you have at least enough talent to compete. And then from there, like you said, hitting on difference makers, coaching development, injury luck, and kind of go from there. But nice baseline for almost half the Big Ten landing in the top 26.
Really interesting to see Nebraska and Wisconsin in that ranking. Like, I think we forget about how much success Washington has had, and obviously it's been with different coaches through the years. Most recently, Kalen DeBoer, and then Jed Fish this year. So I think Washington, with all the hype surrounding the 4 teams joining the Big Ten. Obviously, we get USC, and we're going to talk to Antonio here in a moment. The allure of LA and Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams, the star power from years and years ago, the Pete Carroll era. Like, we get it. Oregon's been flash and dash, and they have all the resources, and they've been ultra successful, even though they haven't won that national championship yet. But with the Chip Kelly, the Marcus Mariotas, you go on and on with them. UCLA's UCLA. Maybe you're starting to look more basketball there, but they've had success in football in the past. But Washington, and the reason I say this is I actually broadcasted a women's basketball game last night at Penn State, between Penn State and Washington. And They had just recently retired Kelsey Plum's number, who was at the time, she was the all-time leading scorer in women's college basketball. Washington, you start looking at it, women's volleyball, women's basketball, their men's basketball, football, and being a playoff team a couple of years and being in the national championship. I don't think we talk enough about Washington as being a power and being a legitimate ad for, like, they're kind of thought of maybe Washington, UCLA in some ways is like, okay, we got Oregon and USC. We're going to bring Washington and UCLA along with them. Like, they're a legitimate ad in football. That is a big-time stadium with a good fan base. They have resources. They're good in a lot of sports. That's an elite add of an athletic department, an athletic program to the Big Ten. I know that doesn't, again, not directly what we're talking about right now, but to see them in that ranking, to see the success they've had with a couple of different coaches in the college football era, and to have always been a really competitive team and have been on that threshold of being among the nation's elite. I don't think we talk about Washington enough. And I could see Jedd Fisch, and I know we talked about it last week, Jedd Fisch doing some really big things with them coming up in the very near future.
No, you're right. It's going to be exciting to see. And that's again, just I think shows right now the level of trust that players have in Jedd Fisch and the vision they see of what he's building. Mass exodus 2 years ago after Kalen DeBoer took them to the national title, but now you're starting to see, kind of like Michigan as well. You lost a lot after going to the national title game in 2023, a little down year in 2024, but now you're starting to see the talent come back to Seattle, come back to Ann Arbor. Things are looking up for those two programs as well. A team that we have a lot of questions about that maybe could be going in the right direction, we'll see, is USC. They had, as we just mentioned, the 17th ranked class in terms of high school and transfer portal rankings here going to 2025. But they've also made a bunch of hires recently to add to their, let's call it the front office. But this is not the only program that's doing it. So to kind of get a deep dive on what to expect, not only from USC's hires, but really all of college football now, is this the direction? We're kind of looking at more of an NFL GM head coach model. Antonio Morales of The Athletic will join us, kind of talk some overarching Big Ten roster construction questions. Antonio will join us next. And welcome back into Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey, Brian Tripp here with you. So USC is a program we talked a lot about on Tuesday's pod, talk about their direction, where they're going. They made a lot of investments here in what basically is a front office in the last few weeks. So here to explain that and a lot more about the state of the program is a man who covers USC for The Athletic, is Antonio Morales. Antonio, what's going on, man? How are you?
Nothing much, man. It was a long day at USC yesterday, actually, because they introduced all those new hires. Chad Bowden on the personnel side, and then some of the new coaching staff. So a lot of new faces at USC. They're obviously trying to restructure things with the personnel side and some of the stuff on the coaching staff. So it's been a busy time.
A couple of really good sound bites yesterday from Rob Ryan.
Yeah, it's he could go on a story, go on a little bit of a ramble, and he did yesterday. But he's definitely one of the more interesting assistant coaches we've talked to at USC over the past few years.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You're right about that. I want to actually start this conversation, Antonio, with a tweet you had a few weeks ago. And you said after the Penn State game, USC, obviously moved to the Big Ten. They paid extremely well for their coaching staff. They have a brand new facility, put out a gigantic chunk of change in terms of kind of putting coaches, players around Lincoln Riley. And you said that this is the best setup commitment any USC head coach has ever had. What would you say right now the state of the USC program is under Lincoln Riley going to 2025?
Well, it's kind of stuck, right? It's first year, 11-3, which was a tremendous year given what USC was the year before. They won 4 games, then were nearly in the college football playoff a year later. So that was a great year by Lincoln Riley. There's no doubt about that. But then they come into 2023 with heightened expectations, and then they fall on their face and they go 8-5, and they lose, I think, 5 of their last 6 games in the regular season. And some of those games they won were they're extremely fortunate to win down the stretch. And so that was a disappointing year, and you kind of squandered Caleb Williams last year. And then, okay, you fix the defense, and then everyone assumes, well, Lincoln Riley's just a walking top 10 offense, scoring, yards per play, and everything like that. And the offense regresses, and then he has 2 quarterbacks, but none play particularly great. And Lincoln Riley's the quarterback whisperer. He's the guru. And so that side of the ball takes a step back, and USC goes 6-6 in the regular season. And the way they went 6-6 was just super frustrating for the fan base, because so many of those losses are one possession losses to Penn State in overtime. They were within a touchdown of Notre Dame in the final 3 minutes of the game. They lose to Michigan on the last second. So there's these losses that are like that. But then you also have a loss like Maryland, who only won 1 game in the Big Ten, and it was against USC. And you lose to Minnesota on the road when it looks like you almost have control of that game. And so I think people are really soured on Lincoln this past year, just because of the close losses. I don't think the fan base is like completely done with him or anything, but I think people were like, what's going on here? And it's just 2 back-to-back disappointing years. And I think that people are kind of like, oh, we'll see how it goes this year. It's year 4. It's his roster. It's his vision. And he's had the time to kind of get everything right. So we'll see kind of what happens this year. It's a tough schedule. So I think people are kind of like, hey, you have everything you need. You've changed the defense coordinator. You have this personnel department. NIL's been better the past year. It's kind of on you to win games now.
Let's talk about that personnel department, because hiring Chad Bowden away from Notre Dame, and then he brings in guys he's familiar with, and a lot of Midwest ties there, and Dre Brown from Illinois, Max Steinecker from Wisconsin, who were in big roles at those schools. And now they come to maybe lateral positions or payday, like for whatever reason, they feel like they need to be a part of this with Chad and Lincoln Riley at USC. What was the motive to revamp that department, and how does that help USC get out of what has been, as you said, kind of a stale, stagnant position here the last couple of years?
I think there's always kind of been a restructure coming to USC's personnel department. They had Dave Emmerich in the general manager role at USC the past 2 years, but he was hired in like June 2022, and that's before like this general manager role really became what it is now. I think he was hired to basically be like an administrative guy who was helping out with staff hires and doing all that sort of stuff, not to be like negotiating NIL contracts and everything like that. So there's this change personnel wise that was kind of always going to be coming. I think people realize that. So USC, this search took a while. It dated back to last June when they tried to hire Courtney Morgan from Alabama, and he declined. I think USC, it was reported that he was offered $1 million. So you knew they were kind of serious with the investment in terms of how much they wanted to financially put into this restructure and this position. So the search, after they don't hire anybody in the summer, it's going to be impossible to hire somebody during the season and pull somebody away. And they had their eyes on Chad Bowden. And then after Notre Dame lost the national title game, he was hired by USC. And then Lincoln Riley said it yesterday. He was like, Chad Bowden's obviously a huge part of what they want to do, and he is a part of what they want to do, but it's more than one person. So they invested this much money in Chad, and then it wasn't just going to stop there. It was going to be, we're going to build this whole thing out to kind of take the plate off of the coaches, because the coaches have to deal with so much now. You're re-recruiting your roster every year, every day, basically. USC lost to Bear Alexander basically in the middle of the season. So you're re-recruiting your roster pretty much every day. And you have to deal with all that stuff. And there's NIL negotiations and recruiting and high school kids. And then there's a lot on these coaches' plate now. And I think they're trying to build out and structure this personnel department to where it lets the coaches kind of focus on coaching football and let the personnel side handle some of the other stuff.
USC's right in the news because they made these hires recently, right? But a lot of other Big Ten schools, a lot of other just college football schools have made similar hirings. I know every school could be different, Antonio. So maybe just from USC's perspective, like, is this now looking like it's basically an NFL model? Like these guys, Chad Bowden, et cetera, are like basically the GMs. They're in charge of searching the players, recruiting the players, and that allows Lincoln Riley and their other coaches to coach. Like, is that kind of, I guess, the idea behind USC and again, a bunch of other programs now hiring these general manager roles?
Yeah, and Lincoln said that yesterday. He was like, it's going to be a partnership. And that like one of the first things Chad Bowden told him was like, hey, we're going to, like, we want to make it to where you can just coach the football team when you know like the recruiting side of things are going to be handled. So I think Lincoln will still be involved in the day-to-day recruiting stuff. I just think Chad Bowden's going to kind of be steering the ship in that regard. And I think Lincoln said they're going to be in charge of, the recruiting and the evaluation and the scouting and all that stuff. So I think that'll take some of that load off of the assistants and things like that. And I think the interesting thing is, because you asked about like NFL structure, I don't think anybody really knows yet who does Chad Bowden report to. Does he report to Lincoln Riley, or does he report to Jen Cohen? And I think there's a difference between who he does report to. So we still have yet to find that out. And I think that'll help tell us a lot more structure-wise too.
What do you expect their philosophy to be in recruiting here, joining the Big Ten last year, getting to go through that, kind of see strengths, weaknesses, style of play in the league? All these people that they're bringing in have Midwest ties, that I mentioned before, but still California is such a rich recruiting base. What do you expect the philosophy to be in recruiting, portal, just the overall vision of the program? And it all starts obviously with Lincoln Riley.
Yeah, one of the first things that Bowden said yesterday is USC is going to major in high school and then minor in the portal. And that's something that Marcus Freeman often said at Notre Dame. So it's clear they're going to try to follow some of that same Notre Dame blueprint. And when I think of the Notre Dame blueprint, I think of the trenches. That's where they've been so strong the past few years. And USC has lacked that the past few years. The offensive line hasn't been a real strength for more than a decade now. And that was always one of the stronger parts that beat Carroll's teams, the defensive line as well. USC's had talented players along the offensive and defensive line, but it hasn't been strong top to bottom and depth wise. So that's something that needs to get addressed. And I think that'll probably be one of the first areas that Bowden tries to address, just because it's a prereq for competing at a national level and in the playoffs. So I think that'll be kind of what happens with kind of the model and the areas they plan to attack. I think Bowden was really smart with how he used the portal at Notre Dame, and they're very strategic. And you saw kind of what they did at quarterback the past 2 years, where it was very clear within the end of the regular season, like, okay, they're going to get Riley Leonard, they're going to get Sam Hartman. So they're very strategic with how they used it. And I think USC's kind of leaned off it ever since Lincoln Riley's first year, where he just like completely turned over the roster and brought in like 20 transfers. It's been like around 10, 11 the past 2 years. Chad didn't want to give too much away when I asked about like the roster and what he thinks of it. He said it's a great roster and it's our job to enhance it. But I think the spring portal window and this 2026 recruiting cycle will kind of reveal his true feelings about the roster, because we'll see what areas he plans to attack and what areas he thinks he needs to address.
You mentioned the trenches, right? Trying to beef up the offense and defensive lines. Would you expect like how USC plays, especially offensively, to change? Like, is there a systematic change in terms of how they look on the field? Or do you just think maybe they'll stay, the style of play, kind of the open style that Lincoln Riley likes to run, especially a lot at Oklahoma, will stay, just the toughness in the trenches will change?
I think it just depends on the quarterback. We saw when he had a running quarterback like Jalen Hurts, they're a very physical kind of, run it right at you kind of team. And he hasn't had like a real runner at quarterback at USC. He had Caleb Williams, and Caleb ran his first year, but he didn't run a lot his second year, whether that's a Lincoln Riley decision or a Caleb Williams decision. He didn't run a ton his second year. And then Miller Moss and Jaden Mayava, they aren't real runners either. I think the thing that frustrated USC fans last year was they had two good backs, Woody Marks and Quentin Joyner. I think Quentin Joyner averaged like 7 yards per carry, and then Woody Marks was about 1,000-yard back, and they could run the ball really, really well. And especially the second half of the season, the line really gelled well. But USC just wasn't super committed to the run game last year the way they should have been. And so I think that's a question that people still have, because they've shown that they showed the ability to run the ball last year, and they didn't really stick to it a bunch. I think the fan base wants to see a more of a commitment to the run game, because even though the offensive line lost some guys this year, that probably should be the strength of the offense.
Last one from me, Antonio. What's kind of the cachet of USC right now? What should we expect with them moving forward? Where do they fit in what is obviously the best conference in college football?
Yeah, well, I think at best you're like they're a second tier Big Ten team, right? You're clearly behind Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, Penn State. So they're hoping to get into that level, but they need to recruit better. Those teams, I think, all have a talent advantage over USC. And I know USC fans would be like, we have all this talent and they're not that much more talented than us. So it's like Michigan has Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, Will Johnson, all those guys are probably first rounders. And then there's nobody on USC like Abdul Carter and some of the offensive guys like Kayshawn Allen, Nick Singleton, Tyler Warren, like we saw when USC tried to cover him. So like there's still like a talent deficit that USC is facing against some of these teams. And that's like a gap they need to close. And the way they've had like top 15 recruiting classes, top 20 recruiting classes the past 2 years, and you're just not going to close the gap when Michigan's in the top 10 and they're stepping up their recruiting, and Oregon's the top 5 recruiter, and Ohio State's a top five, sometimes top 1 recruiter. They need to find a way to close the talent gap with those schools. USC showed the ability to play Penn State close, to play Notre Dame close. So they also showed the ability to lose to Maryland and Minnesota. So they're a pretty inconsistent team, and like the margins aren't huge when it comes to the talent they have. Like they have to play pretty clean football, and last year they didn't. If like we saw the highs and we saw the lows, and then it's a kind of wide variance. And I think USC needs to get their talent level to a place to where it's enough to overcome Maryland and Minnesota and things like that. So I think just talent acquisition is going to be such a huge part of kind of where they need to go going forward.
And on that note, to wrap up, Antonio, Tripp and I had a big discussion on Tuesday just about like the state of USC. Like how do I think like older folks kind of still look at USC as like a top brand, and they remember the Pete Carroll days and the history of USC. Mm-hmm. What about high school recruits? And what about even kids down the transfer portal? Like you've been on the ground. They're like, do kids still view USC as, wow, it's USC? Or do they have to kind of earn their respect back because they don't remember Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart, and that only happens by winning games on the field? Like, is USC still viewed as one of those top tier programs, you feel like, by high school kids, recruits, and college transfers?
I think it still has some cachet, but not as much as it used to. I think it's been like these kids are what, 18 or 17, 18 years old right now. So they'd have been born in like what, 2007, 2008. And that's after Reggie and everything. That was kind of the tail end of Pete Carroll's run. So, I mean, I got a crack out of like USC fans who were like, oh, like, let's give this linebacker the number 55 jersey. And I'm like, okay, like the number 55 was worn by Junior Seau, Willie McGinnis, Keith Rivers. Like a lot of these recruits don't even like watch football games on Saturdays. Like, do you really think they know who wore number 55 at USC? Like, so there's like some part of USC that's like still clinging to tradition when traditions like kind of mattered less than it ever has in college football with the way NIL is working, conference realignment and everything like that. So traditions kind of mattered kind of as little as it ever has. And so it's like USC kind of needs someone with vision who could kind of push it forward. I think it's lacked that over the past decade or so. And I think like these kids see Oregon, who's always been innovative and on the cutting edge, and they've seen Oregon be the best team out west for like 15 years now. And then so it's not a surprise when you see kids want to go play there, and they've been on the kind of forefront of uniforms and NIL and offense when they had Chip Kelly. So there's always these things that made Oregon like a cool school, and USC kind of needs to find its niche and kind of figure out what it's going to be, and it has to kind of establish an identity and a vision to attract some of the younger kids who are going to Oregon or leaving California to go to Alabama and Michigan or Penn State and Ohio State. So it kind of has to establish an identity and figure out what it wants to be first.
Antonio, great stuff. Really appreciate it. Thanks for spending your morning with us. I know it's a little bit earlier out there on the West Coast, so thanks so much.
No problem. Thanks, guys.
Really good stuff from Antonio. I think it peels back that curtain. But the one thing that stands out is surprisingly not about the GM, not about the personnel department, not about Rob Ryan. But he said USC needs the talent to not lose to Minnesota, not lose to Maryland. And I think when I talked about earlier in the podcast, the depth of talent, remember a couple of years ago, I think it's 2 years ago, Maryland felt like this is the year we're going to get over the hurdle. We're going to go into Columbus and win. We're going to be able to beat Penn State when they come to College Park, and they have the talent at wide receiver, Tagovailoa at quarterback. But why can't they ever get over the hurdle? because they don't have the depth of talent to do it for 60 minutes. And that's, when he said that, it resonated with me, as USC has the talent to go toe-to-toe with the top teams because they've got some upper echelon players, but they don't have the depth of talent right now because of how they recruit it, and that's what's holding them back. And when he said that, it resonated with me because Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, Oregon, Washington, like the biggest things for the teams that have been at a championship level or at a championship level is they're just superior, right? No matter what happens when Ohio State, Kinnick might be tough. And yeah, there's an anomaly here or there, but most of the times a team that's favored, right? This is kind of that Penn State model. When they're favored, might be close, might get pressed a little bit, but ultimately they have too much talent in the end. We saw that this year with USC against Notre Dame and Penn State, as he talked about. We've seen it with Ohio State, like Nebraska gave them a game, but ultimately just not good enough. Indiana went right down and scored to start on the road in Columbus, but ultimately not deep and good enough. And when he said that about USC, it clicked, and that resonated with me.
And I think he also, what I like too, in part of his first answer was just the fact that like, there's no more excuses now. Chad Bowden, Dre Brown, they made hires to where USC is set up to where they're going to attract the best possible talent they get and pull out all the stops in terms of courting that talent. Because I think Antonio is right. I think you just can't say we're USC anymore and have kids be like, okay, I'm dying to go here. You got to try. I thought the Oregon comparison was spot on. They've been always out in front. And that's, I think, a big reason why Oregon's always been the more talented team now the last 15, 20 years. And so for USC, it's an effort, but I think at least you could feel good in the sense of, forget Lincoln Riley, whether he's the guy or not. You could feel good that USC now has a structure in place to where they have, the capability of getting anyone and everyone they want. They have a plan. They are investing. They're not saying, okay, here's a shoestring budget. Lincoln Riley, go make, what you can and go compete with Ohio State. They're putting their money where their mouth is to get that talent level sooner rather than later to the Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, Oregon level. And at least the investment is there now. We'll see. I think it's more on Lincoln Riley the next few years to make the most he can with his talent.
Well, I think they're starting to build the model of what we're going to see. It's that NFL model. I think the question is, one thing, it's to accumulate talent and recruit in a traditional sense. But ultimately, that playing field's leveled with every school having money now. Every school has the $20.5 million going into next season. So how do they distribute it? What are they going to do to distribute it? How smart is their cap guy, for a lack of a better phrase? So, but still, you can supplement that with additional NIL, which USC is going to have. I think it looks like they have a model that will be successful for them. But I think just to say, yes, they've got it remains to be seen. I'd be incredibly optimistic about the long-term future of USC football if I'm a USC fan. And I'll tell you, I don't think that talent gap's as large as Antonio says it is, because I was there on the sideline in Southern California. I watched that game against Notre Dame preparing for the Orange Bowl. They're good. They were still a good team. And there were games you went into where you're like, you know what, this isn't a good team. They're still a really good football team, even though they weren't able to figure out ways to win those games. Now, half that talent left. Then again, they brought half a roster in. So many moving parts there. But it's great to have perspective from someone on the ground, boots down on the ground in Los Angeles.
And just the last point. That's right. Big Ten country. It's on the map, baby. Last thing I want to say in terms of just a general Big Ten point, general college football point, because you heard Antonio say basically the idea of bringing in Chad Bowden and basically building a front office is so that the coaches can get back to coaching. Less on their plate when it comes to NIL recruiting. Maybe Trip, because we talked about it on Tuesday's pod, the exodus of coaches going to the NFL. Obviously, Chip Kelly's the biggest name recently, leaving to go coach the Raiders. Maybe that now going forward, as more teams start to implement that model, maybe that helps keep good coaching talent in college football and not have them run to the NFL to where now you can, because you hear it from so many guys, I just want to coach, right? They get into this profession because they love coaching, talking X's and O's, developing young kids. And like you see, there's so many different avenues and directions getting pulled. Maybe now with having guys that primarily, do most of the groundwork for recruiting in NIL, maybe that helps keep more talent in college football.
I mean, every organization's already had that, though. Like, and to what Antonio said, you're still recruiting your own players every day. Who's going to be the one that's helping them with their business deals? Who's going to be the one helping them with their taxes because they have to pay taxes on the money they're getting through NIL? Who's going to be the one who's in the meeting room, stepping between star defensive end, star defensive tackle, throwing a hissy fit because star defensive end's making more money than he is. So, well, why is he on more money? How do I get to that? If I don't get an additional 100,000, if I'm not getting an additional 500,000, I'm out. That's the position coaches. So I think in this NFL, here's what you're getting paid. Go to the front office. You got a problem? Go to the front office. Let your agent handle it. Here, not so much.
Well, can't you do the same?
I think it makes it that much more complicated. I don't think it makes it easier to coach college football because you hire a couple people in your personnel department. Everyone's already had a big personnel department. There's just more spotlight on it now. People are just talking about it more.
I hope I'm right. I hope you're wrong, honestly, because if so, then those headaches coaches don't want to deal with. I guess we'll kind of see. I mean, these departments are getting bigger. It's gonna be interesting, very interesting for sure. Last thing here, Trip, before you go, let's hear it. Super Bowl prediction. What we got here? Your Birds taking it through. How you watching the game? What are we doing?
Yeah, so I haven't decided yet because I'm leaving in a couple of minutes to go to Madison, Wisconsin for hockey this weekend. We'll get back pretty late on Saturday night. I think when they won against New England in Super Bowl 52, I did go to Philadelphia to watch the game just to be in the city as with friends that grew up with watching Eagles games for a long, long time. It's like the group chat in real life, right? Group chat plans a trip, group chat watches a game. That I believe is my plan for this one, to go to Philadelphia. Obviously winter weather and travel and timing, but I'm going to go to an apartment. It's not right in like center. It's close, but not. So I don't know that you'll see me on Broad Street after
Reach
the
those
game.
polls, baby. Come on, Trip. Come on. Eating horse crap?
I'm not entirely sure exactly. Now, I know some of those people that are going to that are probably watching this podcast, so I'm sure I'll be getting texts. You're coming? Oh, you gotta come. You gotta come to the party. But I do think it's a party that will go well into the night. I think the Eagles are the better team. They're the more complete team. And I think they win it easily over the Chiefs, which I can't believe I'm saying because of Mahomes and Reed and Spags, and that Chiefs defense is good. If Barkley can pop one or two, Philadelphia 31, Kansas City 17.
Look, I'm not someone to rub it in the face. I'm actually rooting for the Eagles, not because I hate the Chiefs. I want my pick to be right. And I think I've been on the Eagles bandwagon for a few months now. So I think the Eagles will win. I'm rooting for them to win. I'm rooting for, obviously, most importantly, you to be happy. But boy, oh boy. Tuesday, I really hope the quote doesn't come back. Eagles will win easily. I really hope we're not talking about that quote on Tuesday.
I know it's Mahomes, and to expect Mahomes and Reed in this setting to do the unexpected. I just think top to bottom, I think the Eagles are better. I think the only team in the NFL that can beat the Eagles is still the Philadelphia Eagles. I think Vic Fangio is a difference maker in this. I think their youth on defense is a difference maker in this. I think Saquon is. Hurts has played incredibly well in big games during his career. He played great in the NFC Championship. I thought he played well in the divisional round in the snow against Los Angeles. He would have been the MVP in the Super Bowl 2 years ago had they won the game or had a chance. Like if they don't screw that call up and call holding, where the phantom holding call, the ref just can't inject himself into the game in that spot. Eagles get the ball back. I think Hurts probably leads them down to score and to win the game. I just think it's all aligning. I think this is a great Eagles team, and I think the Eagles, I think they're that much better. I do. As long as they don't turn the ball over, they will be. If the Eagles play mistake-free football as they've had for much of the year, they won't lose.
31-17. I will go 28-20. Eagles over the Chiefs. Caw-caw. Fly, Eagles, fly. Enjoy the game on Sunday. Good luck to your heart trip. I'm sure that will be a heart attack waiting to happen. and we'll break it all down here on Tuesday. Plus, some Big Ten head coaching tiers. Be on the lookout for that. That is coming on the next pod on Tuesday. Subscribe if you get your pods, YouTube and audio-wise as well. We'll be back on Tuesday right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.